Hi guys, my name is Brett Yancey and today we're going to go over making histograms using Excel to do this really complex frequency distribution that your book is describing. So with that, let's get started. I promise by the end of this presentation you'll have a better understanding of how to create a histogram within Microsoft Excel using the online license version, and you'll have a better understanding of how that can help you accomplish a frequency distribution. So, what is a frequency distribution? Well, let's start with what the book does well, and it describes what things are very well. I'm picking on the book, but this chapter was difficult. So a frequency diagram shows the number of times each of the measured values occurred when the data were collected. So occurred is the key word here. And so what will a histogram or a frequency distribution do in this particular problem? Well, let's set the table. So I would start off a problem like this with this data set by saying it's your first day as a quality management professional at a call center. The call center VP has called you into their office. They've asked you to do a frequency distribution or a frequency diagram given the following data set. And then it's going to give you a data set. Now, I find this particularly useful because this is actually what will happen in an office, okay? Especially if you're doing analyst type work. And what the data would look like is you'd have a call ID, you'd have a length of call, you'd have like a user ID, you'd have a date, you'd have a time, and so on. And so there'd be all these fields. And what I would want you to do is whittle down these fields to what you needed, okay? And so again, today we're going to focus on the length of the call. And we know that the optimal length of a call for the highest rate of customer satisfaction is, let's say, 6 minutes, okay? And that would be given in the problem. So then I might even go ahead and give you a few pieces of statistical data. Right, so I might give you the max, I might give you the min, I might give you the standard deviation, I might give you the variance, and a few other things. You know, generally in problems like these, you're given too much data and you have to take away what's important. So for these purposes today, I just want you to understand that the range is very important when you're doing a frequency distribution. And so I want you to understand how to get that. Now to get the range, this would be the Q&A part of the class where I would say, how do you get the range? And to which someone would hopefully reply, you take a given data set and you subtract the maximum, you subtract the minimum from the maximum. So what's the maximum of this, right? And we're going to go ahead and focus on this data set. Oops. Okay, so let's look at the max. So to get the max of the length of call minutes, right, because that's what we're focused on, we do equals max, open parentheses, and then I'm going to click this 4. And then once I click this cell D5, I hold down Control, I hold down Shift, and I press the down arrow. Oops. That brings it all the way down to D276. I hold down Shift, I close my parentheses. Okay, so now we have the max. Now we want the min. Equals min, open parentheses, click D5 again, Control Shift down, close parentheses, enter. All right, and as that smart student said, we just subtract 12 minus 11. So when we make our histogram later, which is what we're going to do to make this frequency distribution or this frequency diagram, that's one of the key elements that Excel is looking at. It's looking at the range of the data set, okay? And that's what I want you to know. So let's go ahead and give it a try. I click cell C4, Control Shift, right arrow, down arrow. Okay, and then And I'm going to pretend I'm you. I'm going to pretend I'm a student. I haven't done much work with this. I'm in Excel. I'm messing around. I'm trying to figure out how to make this histogram, aka frequency diagram. And so I highlight my data set because I know that much. Now I know I'm going to insert a chart. So I go down to Insert, and then it's going to bring up, let's see what recommended chart says. That's kind of cool, actually. So I always like to look at those recommended charts just because sometimes they have cool ways of looking at things that I wouldn't think of. All right, but we know we are making a histogram because that's what the problem asks for. And so you scroll through all your options and finally you come across histogram. Okay, so we insert, we do histogram, we get this. All right, now clearly there's a problem with this. Now let's look at it objectively. So what is it doing? Well, it has, vertical axis. Can't really tell what that's pulling in, but what I can tell very clearly is what this horizontal axis is doing. And that's because I remember that there's about 276 of these call IDs. And the horizontal axis goes up to 295. So it looks like where I want the length of call minutes on the Y, they don't have it there. So what are we going to do? Well, first we're going to delete this. And then we're going to move over this block of data, right? So moving data around in Excel is a key skill. And so that's why I'm having you do it. So you're holding down Control, you're holding down Shift. After I click cell D4, go down, Control X. Control X is copy. I press Control Home. That brings me all the way back up. I go to B4, because we're moving this from D4 to B4, and I press Control V. Alright, so now we got our length of call minutes on the B column and our call ID on the C column. So now I'm going to click cell B4, Control Shift, right arrow, down arrow. I'm going to go to Insert. We go to our charts, and if you remember, we wanted the histogram. Okay, so now we have our histogram. Very good. So what Excel has very elegantly done, that would otherwise take an incredibly long time to do by hand, is it counted the distributions between, and we'll call these bins, okay? Or if it helps you think of it more clearly, think of them as buckets. Okay, so we have these buckets, and the buckets that Excel has created are on the bottom there, right? And it's using 2.4, which is interesting because I could show you how to get 2.4, but I'm not going to. I want this up here just so I can. Okay, I got there. So you're looking at the bottom and you're looking at those in terms of buckets. So what Excel's done is it's created one bucket between the numbers of 1 and 2.4, or 1 and 2.4 minutes. And it has 2.4 and 3.8, 3.8 to 5.2, and so on, all the way up to 12.2. Well, let's look at this from the Excel perspective. So I right-click the chart, I go to Format. Okay, so let's do chart title. I always like to change this from the get-go. All right, that's fine. So this is how you format your horizontal and your vertical axis. What we want to focus on today is the series, which is the length of call minutes. Now, where you can play around with this is in this little drop box, okay? And if we do play around with it a little bit, if we do by category, ooh, that looks bad. Auto, okay, so it's using some descriptive statistics to figure this out. Bin width. Okay, so let's do something with bin width. Okay, so bucket width. Think of it in terms of the width of minutes, right? So if we set that equal to 1. Oh, okay. So now what do we have? We have the number of calls within each minute, right? So between 1 and 2 minutes, we have about 20, or looks like 19. How would I be able to get the exact number? That would be a question I would ask. Well, if we go up here, there's a little icon called data labels. So we click data labels. I'm going to click outside end. Good. So I was right, 19. Then we got 34 between 2 and 3. We got 22 between 3 and 4. We got 25 between 4 and 5. And think of those numbers on the bottom there as what your text will describe as point intervals, right? So how many elements fit that point interval of 1 to 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, 3 to 4, and so on, okay? And if it had seconds, then that would be more helpful. So one of the questions I might have for a problem like this is, given point interval 6, 7, how many calls fit into those parameters? And of course, you would answer 40, right? Because you created your histogram and created a good frequency diagram that, if you think about it, is a lot quicker than going through and counting each one individually. So there's something else I want you to notice about this, which is how many ranges that it came up with. And then I would ask the question, how many ranges did Excel come up with? Well, if you count them out, it's 11, right? Which is also our range. Now, that's very deliberate. And so if we look over here at our formatting menu again, right, we had by category, which didn't really work. We had auto, which works semi-well. And then we had numbers of bins. And if we do 11 numbers of bins, it brings up that same scenario. Let's try it again. Let's try 5 bins. All right. And so what Excel does here is it just busts it down to between 1 and 3.2 minutes, between 3.2 and 5.4, and so on. Okay. Okay, so there's one important thing I want you to understand when we're looking at this, and that is interval notation, because our horizontal axis is using that interval notation. Okay, so what is interval notation? It's basically describing between 2 points, right? And it uses parentheses and brackets. A parentheses is used when the point or value is not included in the interval, and a bracket is used when the value is included. So is the key word for bracket, is not for parentheses. So if we look at this, everything between 1 and 2 included, excluding 2 to 3 on this one, excluding 3 to 4, right? And that'll help you understand what you're describing when you answer the questions that are posed to you. So again, just to recap, parentheses not included, bracket is included. For this little bar here, parentheses, 2 is not included, bracket, 3 is included. So, and it's also important to note that from Excel's perspective, this thing starts at 1. Okay, and so that's why we looked at the range earlier, because it doesn't start at 0. Yeah, it starts at 0 and number of count, right? But it looks at the minimum, the maximum, and then the range. And so from Excel's perspective, the minimum is 1, the maximum is 12. And so that's what it's pulling into this horizontal axis, right? Okay, so let's tie it all up. What did we do? Well, we were given a data set and posed some questions about call length minutes. We were given some extraneous data that we didn't necessarily need to solve the problem, but we remembered that the range is important here, and to get the range, we're subtracting the minimum from the maximum. We took this length of call minutes data block and we moved it from column D to column B, because when we try to create our histogram, Excel was clearly confused by it. Once we did that, We highlighted our data, right? We did insert, we selected our histogram chart, and once we got into the chart, we used our series length of call minutes, and we played around with this bins category here, right? And we look through auto, we look through bin width, we look through number of bins. Number of bins is actually also a really good one to use. But what we wound up doing was just bin width. And we created our bin width 1 minute long. And when we did that, we created 11 buckets, and it put those buckets into point interval notation. And if you remember that point interval notation, right, which one is and which one isn't, parentheses excludes and bracket includes. Parentheses excludes, brackets include. And so if we look at that, our point interval notation here at the bottom, we have everything between the values of 1 and 2. We have everything excluding 2 between 2 and 3, and so on. And interesting, if you look at the very last one, excluding 11 all the way up to 12. Okay? And so once we had our 11 buckets, we were able to answer the question that was posed by the manager, is how many calls we're having, and this is a theoretical question, is how many calls are we having that fall right in within the optimum customer service satisfaction block of 6 to 7. And so you'd be able to answer, well, sir, we had about 76 calls out of, what was it, 276? And so how many are falling in that? Assuming 276 is 100% correct, 30%, about 30% of our calls are hitting that 6 to 7 minute call goal. Okay, so let's tie it up. And thank you for listening and watching. Hopefully you get some value out of this video lecture. If you have any questions on frequency diagrams or creating histograms in Microsoft Excel, feel free to reach out to me. There's also some really great tutorial videos out there on YouTube for how to do this. And many of them go into greater depth, especially in respect to those bins and those buckets, and how you can play with those to get a better distribution or a better diagram. Have a great day.